The train's whistle cut through the still summer air of Georgetown, Colorado. And as the last passenger disembarked and the locomotive pulled away in a cloud of steam and ash, Lillian Foster remained standing on that weathered platform with her trunk at her feet, and her heart sinking deeper with every passing moment. It was July of 1882, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on her dark traveling dress as she searched the dispersing crowd for a face she had seen only in a faded daguerreotype, the man who had promised in careful script to meet her here and make her his bride. An hour passed, then two. The station master, a grizzled fellow with sympathy in his eyes, had already asked her 3 times if there was anyone he could fetch, anywhere she could go. Each time she shook her head, insisting that her intended was simply delayed, that he would arrive at any moment with a reasonable explanation. But as the sun began its descent toward the mountain peaks and the platform emptied completely, even her stubborn hope began to crack. She had sold everything back in Philadelphia to come west. Her modest inheritance from her aunt had paid for the journey, and a new wardrobe befitting a bride, leaving her with exactly $7.32 in her reticule. There was no family to wire for help, no friends to impose upon. She had burned every bridge to start this new life, and now she stood stranded in a town where she knew absolutely no one, waiting for a man who clearly had no intention of fulfilling his promise. "Miss, I am going to have to close up the station," the station master said gently as dusk began to purple the sky. "Are you certain there is no one I can contact for you?" Lillian straightened her spine, though tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. "No, thank you, I will manage." She had no idea how she would manage. Georgetown was a mining town nestled in the Rocky Mountains, and while the main street boasted several establishments, she had no means to pay for lodging beyond a night or two, and no prospects for employment that would not compromise her reputation entirely. But pride kept her chin up as she lifted her heavy trunk and began dragging it down the platform steps. "That is too heavy for you." The voice came from her left, deep and quiet. She turned to find a man standing beside a sturdy paint horse, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that touched his collar and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. His clothes marked him as a working man, a cowboy by the looks of it, though his boots and hat were of good quality. What struck her most were his eyes, a startling shade of blue-green that seemed to see straight through her carefully maintained composure. "I can manage," she said, though in truth the trunk was nearly as heavy as she was. He did not argue, simply stepped forward and lifted the trunk as though it weighed nothing at all, settling it easily across his saddle. "Where are you headed?" The question hung in the air between them. Lillian opened her mouth, then closed it again. Where was she headed? She had no answer that would not reveal the full extent of her predicament. The cowboy seemed to understand without her saying a word. His expression softened slightly. "I saw you waiting here when I rode through this afternoon, came back past, and you were still here." He paused, then added carefully, "Someone was supposed to meet you." It was not quite a question. Lillian felt her face grow hot with humiliation. "Yes, it appears they changed their mind about the arrangement, their loss." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly that she almost believed him. "My name is Fletcher Nash. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. It is not much, but there is a spare room in the house. You are welcome to stay there until you figure out your next move." Every rule of propriety she had ever learned screamed that she should refuse, that accepting such an offer from a strange man was unthinkable. But the alternative was spending her last dollars on a hotel room, and then finding herself on the street when the money ran out. She studied Fletcher Nash's face, looking for any sign of ulterior motive, but found only patient kindness. "I do not even know you," she said quietly. "That is true. But you do not know anyone else here either, and at least I am offering you a roof that will not cost you anything while you get your bearings." He glanced at the darkening sky. "It is going to be a cold night. These mountains do not hold heat once the sun goes down." Lillian made her decision. Perhaps it was foolish, perhaps she would regret it, but something in Fletcher Nash's steady gaze made her want to trust him. "Thank you. I accept your offer, Mr. Nash." "Just Fletcher," he said, and for the first time she saw the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Can you ride?" "Not in this dress." "Then you will ride behind me and hold on tight. It is rough country between here and the ranch." He secured her trunk carefully, then mounted his horse and reached down to help her up. Lillian gathered her skirts as best she could and took his hand, surprised by the strength in his grip as he pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. She hesitated only a moment before wrapping her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt. "Ready?" he asked over his shoulder. "As I will ever be." They rode out of Georgetown as the last light faded from the sky, following a narrow trail that wound up into the foothills. Lillian held on tightly, acutely aware of every place her body pressed against his, trying not to think about how improper this entire situation was. The horse picked its way confidently through the growing darkness, and above them, the stars began to appear in brilliant profusion, more stars than she had ever seen in her life. "It is beautiful," she murmured, momentarily forgetting her predicament as she stared up at the vast expanse of sky. "Gets under your skin after a while," Fletcher agreed. "I have been out here 3 years now, and I still stop sometimes just to look at it." "Where are you from originally?" "Texas. My family had a spread down near San Antonio, but I wanted something of my own, something I built myself." He guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. "What about you? You sound Eastern. Philadelphia. I was a seamstress there, living with my aunt. When she passed last spring, the building owner wanted to sell and I had nowhere to go. Then I received a letter from a man named Samuel Brennan. He had seen an advertisement I placed in a matrimonial newspaper, and he wrote such lovely things about Colorado and his prospects here." Her voice went flat. "I suppose the lovely things were all lies." Fletcher was quiet for a moment, then said, "I know Samuel Brennan. He has a claim up in Silver Plume, about 10 miles north of here. I heard last week that his mine struck a good vein and he sold his claim for a tidy sum." Lillian felt her chest constrict. So he got what he wanted and decided he no longer needed a mail-order bride. "Seems that way." "Like I said, his loss." Fletcher shifted slightly in the saddle. "For what it is worth, you are better off. Sam Brennan was never going to make anyone happy. He is the kind of man who always wants more than he has." It should not have helped hearing that, but somehow it did. At least she had not been rejected for some failing of her own. She had simply been inconvenient to a selfish man's new plans. The ranch appeared as a darker shadow against the night, a small house with a barn and a few outbuildings clustered at the base of a pine-covered slope. Fletcher dismounted first, then helped Lillian down, his hands steady at her waist. Her legs trembled slightly as her feet touched solid ground after the long ride. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into the barn with his horse. He returned a few minutes later carrying her trunk and a lantern that cast warm light across the yard. "Come on, I will show you to your room." The house was simple but well built, with solid timber walls and real glass in the windows. Fletcher led her through a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, dominated by a large stone fireplace. A hallway led to 2 doors. He opened the first and set her trunk inside. "This was meant to be for my sister when she came to visit, but she decided to stay in Texas with her husband instead. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "I know it is not much." "It is perfect," Lillian said honestly. After the fear and uncertainty of the past few hours, the simple room felt like a sanctuary. Fletcher nodded, looking relieved. "I will leave you to settle in. There is water in the pitcher, and I will have something warm for you to eat in a few minutes." He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Lillian sank onto the bed, her hands shaking now that she was finally alone. She had come so close to complete disaster. If Fletcher Nash had not taken pity on her, where would she be right now? She sent up a silent prayer of gratitude, then forced herself to stand and make herself presentable before joining her unexpected host. When she emerged 15 minutes later, having washed the travel dust from her face and hands and changed into a simpler day dress, Fletcher was stirring something in a pot hanging over the fireplace. The smell made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. She had not eaten since morning. "Just stew," he said apologetically. "I am not much of a cook, but it is hot and filling." They sat at her rough-hewn table, and Lillian tried not to devour the food too quickly, though it was difficult. The stew was actually quite good, thick with meat and vegetables, and seasoned with herbs she could not identify. Fletcher ate quietly, not pushing her to make conversation, and she was grateful for that. She felt wrung out, exhausted not just from the journey but from the emotional ordeal of the day. "I will pay you back," she said finally, "for your kindness. Once I find work in town, I will pay you for room and board." Fletcher looked up from his bowl. "That is not necessary. I offered freely. Nevertheless, I will not be a burden on your charity." Something flickered in his eyes, respect maybe. "All right, if that is important to you, but there is no rush." He hesitated, then added, "If you are looking for work, Mrs. Henderson, who runs the general store, might need help. Her arthritis has been troubling her lately. And there is always sewing work in a mining town. Men are hard on their clothes. Thank you. I will inquire tomorrow." Lillian took a breath, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Why are you helping me, Fletcher? You do not know anything about me. I could be anyone." He considered the question seriously. "I suppose for the same reason you agreed to come here with me. Sometimes you have to take people at face value and hope for the best." He set down his spoon. "And maybe because I know what it is like to be alone in a hard place with no one to turn to. When I first came to Colorado, I spent a winter snowed in with nothing but jerky and coffee because I did not know how to prepare properly. I would have died if a Ute hunter had not found me half frozen and taught me what I needed to know." He shrugged. "Figure I owe the world a debt." "Well," Lillian said softly, "I am grateful you chose to pay it forward today." Over the following days, a careful routine developed. Fletcher rose before dawn to tend his cattle and horses, and Lillian woke to find him already gone, coffee warm on the stove and biscuits wrapped in a cloth. She spent her mornings cleaning the house more thoroughly than it had been cleaned in years, partly out of gratitude and partly because she needed something to do with her restless hands. In the afternoons, she walked the 5 miles into Georgetown, and after several rejections, she finally secured work at Henderson's general store 3 days a week, plus mending work she could do at the ranch. Fletcher never made her feel unwelcome. He was quiet by nature, not given to unnecessary talk, but his presence was somehow comforting. In the evenings, after they had eaten whatever simple meal they had managed together, he would sometimes talk about the ranch, his plans to expand his herd, the challenges of making a life in such unforgiving country. Lillian found herself telling him about Philadelphia, about her aunt who had raised her, about her dream of having a real home of her own someday. What made you answer a matrimonial advertisement? He asked one night as they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. A woman with your skills could have found work in Philadelphia. I could have found work, yes, but always just barely enough to survive, never enough to truly live. I wanted something more. I wanted to belong somewhere. She drew her shawl tighter against the evening chill. I know it sounds foolish. It does not sound foolish at all. She glanced at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. Have you never thought of marrying? I have thought about it. But ranching is hard work, and I do not have much to offer a woman yet. Seemed unfair to ask someone to share this life before I could provide better. He paused. That is what I tell myself anyway. What is the truth? Fletcher was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, the truth is I have not met anyone who made me want to risk it. My parents fought like wildcats. They stayed together out of duty, but there was no joy in it. I promised myself I would not marry unless I was certain it could be different. That is not foolish either, Lillian said gently. As August heat settled over the mountains, something began to shift between them. It started with small things. Fletcher's hand steadying her elbow when she stumbled on the uneven ground, lingering a moment longer than necessary. The way Lillian found herself watching him work with the horses, admiring the easy competence of his movements. The conversations that stretched later into the night, covering everything from philosophy to silly memories from childhood. One afternoon, Lillian was hanging laundry when 3 men rode into the yard. She recognized the type immediately from her weeks in Georgetown. Prospectors, rough and loud and often drunk. These 3 were watching her with expressions that made her skin crawl. Well now, the largest of them said, dismounting without being invited. Who do we have here? I live here, Lillian said firmly, fighting to keep the fear from her voice. My husband will be back shortly. Husband, the man grinned, showing broken teeth. We heard Nash was a bachelor. You are that mail-order bride that got left at the station, are you not? Heard about you in town. The other 2 dismounted as well, spreading out slightly. Lillian's heart hammered in her chest. She was utterly alone, too far from the house to reach the rifle she knew Fletcher kept by the door. You heard wrong. Now please leave. What is your hurry? We are just being friendly. The big man took a step toward her. The lady asked you to leave. Fletcher's voice was cold and hard, nothing like the gentle tone Lillian had grown accustomed to. He stood at the corner of the barn, his rifle held loosely in one hand but pointed at the ground. His posture was deceptively relaxed, but there was something in his stillness that made the 3 men hesitate. Nash. The big man attempted a jovial tone. We were just having a friendly conversation with your guest. Did not look friendly to me. In fact, it looked like 3 men threatening a woman on my property. Fletcher's eyes were flat, dangerous. I suggest you mount up and ride out right now before I stop being polite about it. The tension stretched tight as a wire. Then the big man spat into the dust and jerked his head at his companions. Come on. There are friendlier places to water our horses. They rode out slowly, trying to salvage some dignity, but Lillian noticed they kept glancing back at Fletcher warily. Only when they had disappeared down the trail did he finally lower the rifle and turn to her. Are you all right? Did they touch you? No, you arrived in time. Her voice shook slightly despite her best efforts. Thank you. Fletcher closed the distance between them, and without thinking Lillian found herself stepping into his arms. He held her carefully, one hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, and she let herself lean into his solid strength, breathing in the scent of leather and pine and something essentially him. I am sorry, he said quietly. I should have warned you that there are men around here who would not respect you being alone. I will make sure people in town know you are under my protection. Lillian pulled back just enough to look up at his face. How will you do that? He hesitated, something complicated crossing his features. I will let them think what those men thought, that you are my wife, her breath caught. Fletcher, I know it is not true, and I know it might make you uncomfortable, but it is the only thing that will keep you safe. His hand was still at the back of her head, his thumb brushing lightly against her hair. Unless you would rather I take you into town to find proper lodging. No. The word came out more forcefully than she intended. I do not want to leave. Something sparked in Fletcher's eyes. They stood frozen for a long moment, and Lillian became acutely aware of how close they were, of the way his gaze dropped briefly to her mouth before returning to her eyes. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then Fletcher stepped back, clearing his throat. Good. That is settled then. I will ride into town tomorrow and spread the word. The rest of that day was charged with an awareness that had not been there before, or perhaps had been there all along, but was now impossible to ignore. Lillian caught herself stealing glances at Fletcher as he worked, remembering the feel of his arms around her, the steadiness of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. And several times, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression that made her entire body warm. That night, she lay in her narrow bed unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through the tangle of her feelings. She had known Fletcher Nash for less than a month. It was far too soon to feel this way, this pull toward him that grew stronger every day. She had thought herself in love with Samuel Brennan based on pretty letters, and look how that had turned out. How could she trust her own judgment now? But the truth was that Fletcher had already shown her more genuine kindness and respect than any man she had ever known. He had given her shelter when she had nowhere to go, expected nothing in return, and protected her without hesitation. And beyond that, she simply liked him. She liked his quiet competence, his thoughtfulness, the dry humor that occasionally surfaced in his comments. She liked the way he listened when she spoke, as though her words truly mattered. She liked who she was becoming in his presence, stronger and more certain of herself. The question was whether he felt the same way, or if she was simply a responsibility he had taken on out of that debt to the world he had mentioned. Fletcher did ride into town the next day, and when he returned that evening, his expression was troubled. "What is wrong?" Lillian asked immediately. He sank into a chair, scrubbing a hand over his face. "I saw Sam Brennan in town. He heard I was telling people you were my wife, and he was not happy about it." Lillian felt ice in her stomach. "What did he say?" "He said you were promised to him, and I had no right interfering. I told him he gave up any claim when he did not bother to meet you at the station like he promised." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "He said that was a misunderstanding, that he had been unavoidably detained, and he still intends to honor the arrangement if you are willing." "Unavoidably detained for a month," Lillian heard her voice rising. "And only now, after he hears another man has claimed me, does he suddenly remember his obligation. That is what I thought too. I told him you were not interested, and he should consider the arrangement dissolved." Fletcher met her eyes. "I hope that was all right. If you want to hear him out, I do not." Lillian said it with absolute certainty. "Even if you had not opened your home to me, even if I was still desperate and alone, I would not marry Samuel Brennan now. The kind of man who leaves a woman stranded and only comes back out of wounded pride is not someone I could ever trust." Relief flickered across Fletcher's face. "Good, that is good. But Lillian, there is something else." He took a breath. "The lie about us being married, it is going to cause problems if we keep it up. People will expect certain things, ask questions. And if Brennan decides to push the issue, he could expose the lie and then your reputation would be damaged anyway. So what do we do?" The silence stretched between them. Then Fletcher said quietly, "We could make it true." Lillian's heart stopped. "What?" I know it is not romantic. I know this is not how you dreamed things would happen, but I care about you, Lillian. These past weeks with you here, they have been the best I have had since I came to Colorado. And I think maybe you feel something too, or I am a fool for suggesting this." He stood up, crossing to where she sat, and knelt so they were eye to level. "I am not a rich man. This ranch is small and the work is hard, but I swear to you I would do everything in my power to make you happy. I would be a true husband to you in every way, and I would never, never leave you waiting and wondering if I was coming." Tears blurred Lillian's vision. "Fletcher, you do not have to answer now. Think about it. Think about whether you could see yourself building a life here with me." His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "But know that I am asking because I want to, not because I feel obligated. You have become so important to me, and the idea of you leaving, of not seeing you every day, it is unbearable." "I do not want to leave either," Lillian whispered. "I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. After Samuel, I did not trust my own feelings, but this is different." "You are different. I know I am safe with you. More than that, I am happy with you, happier than I have been in years, maybe ever." Fletcher's eyes searched hers. "Is that a yes?" "Yes. Yes, it is a yes." And then she was kissing him. Or he was kissing her, and it did not matter who moved first because they met in the middle. His mouth warm and gentle against hers, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "We will do it properly," he said. "I will get you a ring, and we will have a real wedding in the church in Georgetown. I want everyone to know you are choosing this, choosing me." "I am choosing you," Lillian confirmed, and kissed him again. The wedding took place 3 weeks later on a brilliant September morning, with the aspen trees turning gold on the mountainsides. Lillian wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Fletcher insisted on buying for her, pale blue with cream lace at the collar and cuffs. Fletcher wore a new suit that made him look handsome and slightly uncomfortable, and when he saw her walking down the short aisle of the small church, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stood as her witness, and Fletcher's nearest neighbor, a gruff cattleman named Tom Winters, stood for him. The ceremony was simple, the words familiar, but when Fletcher slipped a gold band onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Lillian felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was real. This was forever. The kiss that sealed their vows was tender and sweet, and when they turned to face the small congregation that had gathered, Lillian saw genuine happiness on the faces watching them. Georgetown was a rough town, but it took care of its own, and she had become one of them over the past months. There was a small celebration at the hotel, with food and even music provided by a miner who played fiddle. Lillian danced with her husband, marveling at the reality of it. Fletcher held her close, guiding her through the steps with surprising grace. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. "Impossibly happy," she answered. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Fletcher lifted her down from the horse, and this time when he carried her inside, it was over the threshold of their home, truly theirs now. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood looking at each other, suddenly shy. "I want you to know," Fletcher said carefully, "that we can take our time with everything. There is no rush. I meant what I said about being a true husband to you, but I want you to feel ready." Lillian reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rasp of his evening stubble against her palms. "I am ready. I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and sweet, and a little awkward, as first times often are, but filled with so much care that Lillian felt tears sliding down her temples as Fletcher moved over her, in her, his breath harsh against her neck and his hands infinitely gentle. Afterwards they lay tangled together in his bed, which was now their bed, and Lillian traced idle patterns on his chest. "No regrets?" Fletcher asked quietly. "Not a single one." "You, not a single one," he echoed and kissed her temple. "I love you, Lillian Nash." "I should have said it before, but I am saying it now." "I love you too," she whispered. "So much." The autumn passed in a golden haze of happiness. Lillian continued her work at the general store, but now she worked only 2 days a week, spending the rest of her time managing the household and learning the rhythms of ranch life. Fletcher taught her to ride properly, and she taught him to dance in their small main room, laughing as they stumbled over each other's feet. They made plans for the future, talking late into the night about expanding the house, buying more cattle, all the dreams they could build together. In December, the first heavy snow came, and they found themselves snowed in for nearly a week. But unlike Fletcher's first winter in Colorado, this one was warm with companionship and laughter. They read books by the fire, made love in the afternoons when the light slanted golden through the windows, and Lillian taught Fletcher how to make proper bread instead of the heavy biscuits he had been living on. It was during that snowed-in week that Lillian first suspected she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses were late, and she felt queasy in the mornings, though she said nothing yet, wanting to be certain before she raised Fletcher's hopes. By January, there was no doubt, and she waited until they were sitting by the fire one evening to tell him. "Fletcher, I have something to tell you." He looked up from the piece of tack he was mending, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am with child. The baby should come in early summer if my calculations are correct." For a moment he simply stared at her. Then he set down the leather strap and crossed to where she sat, pulling her up into his arms and holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." His hand came to rest on her still flat stomach. "Are you all right? Are you feeling well? Should you be sitting on that hard chair? Do you need anything?" Lillian laughed, though she was crying too. "I am fine, perfectly healthy. The baby is fine. We are both fine." "I am going to be a father," Fletcher said wonderingly. "I cannot believe it. I did not think I could be this happy, and then you keep making me happier." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the morning sickness lingered longer than Lillian would have liked. Fletcher was attentive to the point of hovering, insisting she rest more, doing most of the heavy work around the house despite her protests that she was not made of glass. But his care came from love, and she could not truly be annoyed with him for it. In April, they traveled down to Denver, where there was a proper doctor, to ensure everything was progressing as it should. The doctor pronounced Lillian healthy and the baby strong, and they celebrated by staying in a hotel for 2 nights, one of the few luxuries they allowed themselves. Fletcher took her to a real restaurant, and they walked through the bustling streets, marveling at how different Denver was from the quiet of Georgetown. "You ever miss Philadelphia?" Fletcher asked as they watched the crowds pass. "The civilization, the culture." Lillian considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the convenience of it, the way you could find anything you needed within a few blocks, but I do not miss the loneliness. In Philadelphia, I could be surrounded by people and still feel completely alone. In Georgetown, I have you and I have friends and I have a place I belong. That means more than all the opera houses and museums in the world. Still, when we can afford it, we will travel," Fletcher promised. "I want you to have everything you want." "I already have everything I want," Lillian said, and meant it. They returned to the ranch as the high country began its slow emergence from winter. The aspen leaves unfurled in tender green, Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and Lillian's belly swelled round with their child. Fletcher spent his evenings building a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and rubbing it with oil until it glowed. Lillian sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of anticipation. The baby came on a warm June evening, arriving faster than expected. Fletcher had ridden to fetch Mrs. Henderson and the midwife from town, but the baby had other ideas. Lillian found herself alone with only instinct to guide her, and by the time Fletcher returned with help, she had already delivered their son into her own hands. Fletcher burst through the door, wild-eyed and terrified, to find Lillian propped against the pillows, exhausted but smiling, with a tiny, squalling infant at her breast. "You missed the excitement," she said tiredly. "Fletcher, meet your son." He approached slowly, as though afraid he might be dreaming. The midwife bustled in behind him, immediately taking charge of making sure mother and baby were truly all right, but Fletcher only had eyes for his family. He sank onto the edge of the bed, reaching out one tentative finger to touch the baby's tiny fist. Immediately, impossibly strong fingers wrapped around his, and Fletcher made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "He is perfect," Fletcher whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe you did this all by yourself." "I would not recommend it," Lillian admitted. "But we managed just fine, did we not, little one?" They named him Thomas Fletcher Nash, Thomas after Fletcher's father, who despite the unhappy marriage had been a good father to his children. The baby was healthy and strong, with a good set of lungs, and his father's blue-green eyes. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas at night when he fussed, changing nappies without complaint, sitting and simply watching his son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I want to be different from my father," he told Lillian one night as they lay in bed with Thomas in his cradle between them. "I want our children to grow up knowing that their parents love each other, that marriage can be a joy instead of a burden." "They will know," Lillian assured him. "I will make sure they know every single day how much I love their father." Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. It was exhausting at times, but filled with moments of piercing sweetness. Thomas's first smile, directed at Fletcher as he sang a silly song while changing a nappy. The first time he slept through the night, allowing his parents to actually rest. The way he would calm instantly when Lillian sang to him, some instinct recognizing his mother's voice. The ranch prospered too. Fletcher's cattle herd grew, and he hired a young man named Ben to help with the work, which allowed him more time to spend with his family. They added a room to the house, expanding it so Thomas would have space of his own as he grew. Lillian's sewing business grew as well, with women from Georgetown and beyond seeking her out for dresses and alterations. When Thomas was 8 months old, they had a visitor. Samuel Brennan rode up to the ranch on a gray afternoon in late winter, and Fletcher met him in the yard, his expression hard. "I do not recall inviting you here, Sam. I just want to talk to her," Brennan said. He looked older than the last time Fletcher had seen him, dissipated somehow. "Just to say I am sorry. I was wrong, and I have regretted it every day since." Fletcher crossed his arms. "You can say what you need to say to me, and I will pass it along. You are not coming into my house." Lillian appeared on the porch, Thomas on her hip. "It is all right, Fletcher. Let him say what he came to say." Brennan dismounted but did not approach closer. He looked at Lillian, and something like genuine regret crossed his face. "I was a fool. I let greed and pride make me cruel, and I threw away something precious without even realizing what I had. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry for what I did to you. You deserved better." "Yes, I did," Lillian agreed calmly. "And I found better. I found a man who values me, who loves me, who would never leave me waiting and wondering." What you did hurt me, Samuel, but in the end, you did me a favor. If you had met me at that station, I never would have found Fletcher, and I never would have known what real love feels like." Brennan flinched, but nodded. "He is a lucky man. I hope he knows that." "I know it every day," Fletcher said, moving to stand beside his wife, his arm coming around her waist. "You can consider your apology delivered. Now I think it is time you left." They watched him ride away, and Lillian leaned into Fletcher's solid warmth. "You think he meant it?" "I think he regrets losing you, but I do not think he truly understands what he lost, or he would have treated you right from the beginning." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "I am just grateful for my good fortune. If he had been a better man, you would be his wife right now, not mine." "I would not change a single thing about how we found each other," Lillian said. "Not even the waiting at the station, not even the fear and uncertainty. All of it led me to you." "To us," Fletcher corrected, touching Thomas's soft cheek. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for his father's finger. The years that followed were rich with love and hard work, and the simple joys of family life. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's eyes and his mother's determination. When he was 3, he was joined by a sister they named Caroline Rose, and 2 years after that, another son they called William. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the ranch expanded with it, becoming one of the most successful spreads in the area. Fletcher never lost his quiet nature, but fatherhood brought out a playfulness in him that delighted Lillian. She would find him building elaborate toy corrals with Thomas, or dancing around the kitchen with Caroline on his feet, or making ridiculous faces to make baby William laugh. He was patient with their children, teaching them with gentle hands and never raising his voice in anger. Lillian bloomed in the mountain air and the warmth of her family's love. She had friends now, a community that valued her skills and her kindness. The frightened woman who had stood alone on that station platform seemed like someone from another lifetime. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Fletcher presented her with a gift wrapped in brown paper. Lillian opened it to find a beautifully bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "I thought you might want to write down your story," he said. "Our story, so the children will know how we found each other someday." "That is a wonderful idea," Lillian said, turning the journal over in her hands, "though I am not sure I could do it justice with words." "How do you describe finding home when you did not even know you were lost? You will find a way. You always do." That night, after the children were asleep, Lillian sat at the kitchen table and opened the journal to the first page. She thought for a long moment, then began to write. The train's whistle cut through the still summer air of Georgetown, Colorado, and as the last passenger disembarked, I remained standing on that weathered platform with my heart sinking deeper with every passing moment. Little did I know that the man who failed to meet me that day was giving me the greatest gift imaginable. He was clearing the way for me to find my true love, my true home, my true self. She paused, looking up as Fletcher came into the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. He set one beside her and glanced at the journal. "Started already? I want to make sure I get every detail right while I still remember them clearly." Fletcher leaned down and kissed her temple. "I remember every single moment, the way you looked on that platform, trying so hard to be brave. The way you felt in my arms when you finally let yourself trust me, the first time you said you loved me." His hand came to rest on her shoulder. "I remember all of it, and I would not change a second of it." Lillian covered his hand with hers, feeling the solid weight of her wedding band against her skin. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like the ocean, and somewhere in the house, one of the children stirred and settled back into sleep. This was her life now. Not the life she had imagined when she stepped onto that train in Philadelphia all those years ago, but something infinitely better. "I love you," she said, turning to look up at her husband. "I do not say it enough, but I love you with everything I am." "You say it every day in 1,000 different ways," Fletcher replied, pulling her up into his arms. "And I love you just as much, more even than I did yesterday, and tomorrow I will love you more than today." "That is impossible. There is not room in the world for more love than I already feel." "Then I will just have to prove you wrong." And he did, every single day for the rest of their lives. As the years passed, Georgetown grew and changed. The mining boom eventually slowed, and some families moved on to seek fortune elsewhere. But the Nash family remained, their ranch a constant presence in the mountains. Thomas grew up to take over the ranch from his father, bringing his own bride home to the house Fletcher had built. Caroline became a teacher, opening the first proper schoolhouse in Georgetown. William followed his wanderlust to Denver, but came home every summer with stories of the wider world. Fletcher's hair went silver, but his eyes remained as blue-green as the day Lillian first met him. Her own dark hair developed threads of white, and her hands grew gnarled from years of sewing and ranch work. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, seasoned by shared joys and sorrows, strengthened by the life they had built together. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Thomas had married a sweet woman named Mary, and they had given Fletcher and Lillian 4 grandchildren. Caroline had married late but happily to a fellow teacher, and they had twin daughters. Even William had finally settled down with a spirited young woman he had met in Denver, though they had not yet started a family. After the meal, after the toasts and the laughter, Fletcher took Lillian's hand and led her outside. The September evening was cool and clear, the sky already darkening to reveal the stars that still took her breath away after all these years. "You remember the first night I brought you here?" Fletcher asked, his arm around her waist as they looked up at the vast expanse of sky. "Of course I remember. I was terrified and trying so hard not to show it, and you were so kind, so careful not to frighten me more." "I was smitten the moment I saw you on that platform," Fletcher admitted. "You looked so fierce, so determined not to cry even though I could see your heart was breaking. I knew right then that you were someone special. You never told me that before. Did not want you to think I had ulterior motives in offering you a place to stay, but it is true. I fell in love with you that very first day, and I have been falling deeper ever since." Lillian turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his weathered face. "I fell in love with you too, long before I was ready to admit it to myself. You gave me everything, Fletcher. A home, a family, a purpose. But most of all, you gave me yourself, and that has been the greatest gift of all." They stood there under the stars, holding each other as the sounds of their family's laughter drifted from the house behind them. Inside was warmth and light and love. Outside was the wild beauty of the mountains and the endless sky. And in that moment, Lillian thought about the terrified woman who had stood alone on a train platform 30 years ago, and she wished she could reach back through time to tell her that everything would be all right. More than all right, that the man who never came was making way for the man who would stay forever. "Thank you," she whispered against Fletcher's chest. "For what? For stopping that day. For seeing me, for choosing me." "Always," Fletcher said simply. "I will always choose you." And as the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, as the mountains stood silent and eternal around them, as their family laughed and loved inside the home they had built together, Lillian and Fletcher Nash held each other and knew that they had found what so many spend their whole lives seeking. They had found their place in the world. They had found each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered, The fire of their love, kindled on that desperate day at the station, burned steady and true through all the years that followed. It warmed their children and their children's children. It lit the way through hard times and good. And when, many years later, they finally left this world within months of each other, as couples who have loved deeply sometimes do, that love remained. It lived on in the family they had created, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the stories passed down through generations about the mail-order bride who was left at the station, and the cowboy who gave her not just a place to stay, but a place to belong. Their graves sat side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, and on the shared headstone their children had inscribed a simple truth. Here lie Fletcher and Lillian Nash. They found each other when they were lost, and they never let go. And every year on their anniversary, the family gathered at the ranch to remember and celebrate the love story that had started it all. The children would ask to hear the tale again, and whoever was telling it would always start the same way. Your great-grandmother was left alone at a train station by a man who never came. But that was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning.